I didn't even get to finish my coffee before it happened. One moment, I was reviewing a last-minute code push for the new security update, the one I'd been told to stop asking questions about, and the next, my Slack notifications froze. Then the message popped up in bright red on my monitor: access revoked. Before I could even process it, two men from HR, one I barely knew, the other avoiding my eyes, walked into my cubicle. They didn't ask me to step into a meeting room. They didn't even give me a warning. "Ethan, you need to come with us," the taller one said, like we were rehearsing a scene from a bad corporate drama. I glanced at my screen again. All my drives were locked. My admin permissions, gone. My email? Deleted. I followed them down the hall, past the open-plan desks where my coworkers suddenly found the ceiling very interesting. It was too quiet. Not even the click of keyboards. Just the sound of my own footsteps. When we reached the glass doors of the executive floor, I expected to see my manager, maybe even the CTO, ready to explain whatever misunderstanding had just hijacked my morning. Instead, the COO was there. Waiting. Smiling like a fox. "Ethan," he said, "we're terminating your employment, effective immediately. No warning. No reason. No paperwork in advance." Just those words, so casually spoken it almost sounded like small talk. "What? Why?" I asked, still half expecting him to admit this was some weird company prank. "Conduct issues," he said. "You've been disruptive. It's time for you to go." And that's when I realized, they weren't just firing me. They were erasing me. If you're enjoying this so far, don't forget to subscribe, tap that like button, and comment below where you're listening from. I'd love to know. By the way, my name's Ethan Cole. I'm 31 years old, and until that morning, I was a senior back-end developer at Cinderbyte, one of the fastest-growing AI startups in the country. This happened last spring, the week that would end my career, and expose one of the biggest corporate scandals our industry had seen in years. The COO didn't even bother to look at me after he said it. His attention was on the security guard who had appeared silently behind me, like he'd been waiting for a signal. It hit me then, in that sharp, almost metallic way bad news sometimes does: this wasn't just a firing. This was an extraction. Disruptive? I repeated, still trying to keep my voice even. "I've never—" "Your laptop, please," the guard interrupted. His tone was flat, almost bored. I hesitated. My laptop wasn't just company property, it was my work, my code, my notes, my long nights and weekends poured into this startup. And on that machine, there were files. Screenshots. Logs. Things I'd found just 2 weeks earlier when I stumbled into a part of the codebase I wasn't supposed to touch. Things that could get people arrested. But I wasn't stupid. Fighting them here, in the middle of their territory, would only make things worse. So I set the laptop down on the COO's desk and stepped back. He didn't touch it. He just slid it toward the security guard like it was contaminated. "You'll be escorted out," the COO said, still in that calm, rehearsed voice. "We'll forward your final paycheck to your address on file. Any personal items will be mailed to you after review." Review. That word stuck in my head. It meant they'd go through everything. My notebooks. My USB drives. Even the old hoodie I kept on the back of my chair for late-night deployments. I glanced past him, toward the glass walls of the executive office. Through the frosted stripes, I could see shadows moving, 2, maybe 3 people. One of them was tall, in a dark suit. I didn't recognize him. The COO caught my glance and stepped to block my view. "We're done here." The guard motioned toward the hallway. I walked. Every step felt heavier, like I was sinking. My coworkers pretended to stay focused on their screens, but I caught the quick flickers of their eyes, the guilty way they avoided meeting mine. The elevator ride down was silent, but my mind wasn't. How had they moved so fast? Just last night, I'd been working late, making final changes to the data validation pipeline. I'd been careful, saving copies of the incriminating logs to an encrypted drive at home, never saying anything in Slack that could be flagged. Had they found out anyway? Or had someone sold me out? When the elevator doors opened, the guard led me through the lobby. The receptionist didn't even look up. It was like I'd already been erased from the building's memory. Outside, the spring air hit me like a slap. I stood there on the sidewalk, clutching the cheap cardboard box they'd let me fill with whatever was already on my desk, a coffee mug, a few cables, and a photo of my sister and me at her graduation. I watched as the guard turned and disappeared back into the building. The glass doors slid shut, sealing me out. And that's when the strangest thought hit me: they were scared. Not just of me, but of something I knew. I didn't go straight home. Every instinct told me that the minute I stepped through my apartment door, I'd be tracked, maybe not physically, but digitally. My building had security cameras, my Wi-Fi was tied to my name, and if Cinderbyte really suspected I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to, they'd try to figure out exactly what I still had. So instead, I ducked into a cafe 3 blocks away. One of those dim, plant-filled spaces where everyone wears headphones and pretends to be writing novels. Perfect for disappearing in plain sight. I chose a corner table, ordered a black coffee, and opened my personal laptop, the one they didn't know about. The first thing I checked was my personal email. No new messages from anyone at Cinderbyte, but my stomach twisted when I saw a notification that 2 of my cloud accounts had new login attempts. Both failed, but still, someone had tried. I turned on my VPN, bouncing my signal through 3 countries before logging into the encrypted folder I'd set up 2 weeks ago. It was all still there. The chat logs. The raw data pulls from our internal servers. The folder of strange, unlabeled AI training datasets I'd stumbled across, datasets that contained way too much personal information from real people. Names. Addresses. Entire unredacted medical histories. And then there was the biggest file of all. The one I'd found just hours before my firing. A zipped directory labeled /gov_clients/internal_use_, only the contents were bizarre. Encrypted contracts, internal memos, and what looked like API keys tied to government databases. I didn't have full access, but from the snippets I'd decrypted, it was clear: Cinderbyte wasn't just an AI startup selling predictive models to retailers and advertisers. They were providing custom surveillance software. The kind that could track individuals in real time, to multiple government agencies, foreign and domestic. Some of which weren't exactly on friendly terms with ours. The part that made my blood run cold? In one of the API logs, I'd seen my own name. The timestamp was from 2 days ago. Someone had been running my data through the system. I sat there in the cafe, the coffee cooling in front of me, trying to decide if I just uncovered something illegal, or something that could get me killed. And then my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. A text. Delete everything. They're coming. My thumb hovered over the screen, the words burning into my brain. Delete everything. They're coming. I stared at the sender's number, a random string with no contact name. The area code wasn't local, but it was familiar. I'd seen it in one of the internal access logs at Cinderbyte. It belonged to an IP range used by internal security. So either someone inside the company was warning me, or this was bait to see how I'd react. I glanced up, scanning the cafe. Nothing seemed out of place. The barista was restocking pastries. A guy in a hoodie was typing furiously 2 tables over. A couple by the window was sharing a muffin. Still, the hairs on the back of my neck were standing straight. I set my phone face down and slid my laptop halfway closed. If they were watching me, and by they, I didn't just mean Cinderbite, but whatever government contractors they were tied to. I couldn't look panicked. The text could mean two things: they knew I had the files. They knew where I was. Either way, the clock was ticking. I reopened my laptop, but instead of deleting anything, I began copying the encrypted folders to a hidden partition on a removable SSD drive I kept in my backpack. It was barely the size of a stick of gum, but it could hold every scrap of data I had, and more importantly, it could be swallowed by a cup of coffee if I had to destroy it fast. While the files transferred, I pulled up my encrypted messaging app, the one I used to talk to my sister, Kara, who lived 3 states away. She was the only person I trusted. Me, if something happens to me, look under the floorboard in my bedroom closet. Get it to the press. No explanation. No details. Just enough so she'd know I wasn't joking. The SSD finished copying. I ejected it, slipped it into my sock under my jeans, and zipped my bag. That's when I saw him. The man in the hoodie at the other table. He wasn't typing anymore. He was looking right at me. Not casually. Not like someone just glancing around the room. His gaze was locked, unblinking, with this unsettling calm. He stood up slowly, slung his backpack over one shoulder, and started walking toward me. I didn't wait to see what he wanted. I grabbed my coffee, stuffed my laptop into my bag, and headed for the side exit. My pulse was hammering. I didn't know if he was following me for Cinderbite, for the government, or if I was just losing it. But as I stepped into the alley, I heard his footsteps behind me. And then, another text vibrated in my pocket. This time, it just said, "Too late." The alley was narrow, flanked by damp brick walls that seemed to close in the further I went. My sneakers splashed through shallow puddles left from last night's rain. I didn't run, not yet. Running sends a message. Running says I know you're after me. But my steps quickened, and so did his. I could hear the rhythm of his boots behind me, steady, deliberate. The kind of pace you use when you know you'll catch someone no matter what they do. I reached the end of the alley and turned sharply onto a busier street. Noon traffic rolled past, honking and coughing exhaust. The sidewalk was crowded, office workers on lunch break, delivery drivers unloading boxes, tourists staring at maps. I ducked into the flow, letting the crowd swallow me. If he wanted to follow, he'd have to do it in the open. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I caught glimpses, the edge of his hoodie, the glint of sunglasses. He was keeping pace. I wanted to scream. I wanted to walk right up to him, shove him against the nearest wall, and demand answers. But what would that do? If he was some kind of corporate security contractor, he'd have a badge, a legal excuse, and maybe even a gun. If he was working for someone else, well, that might be worse. I ducked into a pharmacy, pretending to browse the cold medicine aisle. When I peeked between the shelves, my stomach knotted. He was standing just inside the entrance, not even pretending to shop. Just watching. I pulled out my phone and typed Kara's number. My thumb hovered over the call button. What would I even say? "Hey, sis, I think a government-linked tech company has someone tailing me because I stole their illegal surveillance files." Yeah. That wouldn't exactly calm her down. I put the phone away. My jaw ached from clenching it. My thoughts were spiraling. I'd been careful for weeks, careful to cover my tracks, careful not to talk about what I'd seen. And still, they'd found me. Still, they'd fired me. Still, they'd put someone on my back. All for doing the right thing. I wanted to believe I could outsmart them, but standing there in that fluorescent-lit aisle, I finally admitted something I hadn't wanted to face. They were ahead of me. Maybe they'd always been ahead of me. I lingered in the pharmacy longer than necessary, feigning interest in the same shelf of cough drops while my mind worked overtime. The man was still there, leaning casually near the entrance. Not close enough to be threatening, but close enough that I'd have to pass right by him to leave. I counted the seconds. The cashier was ringing up an elderly woman who was fishing for exact change in a coin purse. Behind her, a young guy in a puffer jacket was juggling 2 cases of soda. Everyone else seemed oblivious. Then, through the reflection in the glass refrigerator door, I saw it, a way out. Near the back of the store, beyond the seasonal aisle filled with plastic Easter eggs, there was a narrow door marked, "Employees Only." I knew from experience, back when I worked retail in college, that those doors often led to storerooms with a back exit for deliveries. It was a gamble. If it was locked, I'd be cornered. But if it wasn't? I picked up a random box of allergy medicine and made my way to the register, pretending not to notice the man by the door. I kept my pace steady, my breathing even. The moment the cashier started scanning my item, I slipped away, cutting down the seasonal aisle. The "Employees Only" door was just ahead. My pulse hammered in my ears. I pushed on the handle. It gave. The hallway beyond smelled faintly of cardboard and bleach. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I moved quickly, passing stacks of unopened shipments until I saw another door at the far end, this one with a red exit sign above it. When I pushed through, the sunlight was blinding. I found myself in a narrow delivery lane behind the building, dumpsters on one side, a fence on the other. I didn't stop. I turned right, slipped between 2 parked vans, and emerged onto a side street. I waited until I was half a block away before glancing back. No hoodie. No sunglasses. Just a couple of delivery guys unloading boxes. For the first time since the alley, I exhaled. But the relief was thin, brittle. I knew better than to think I'd actually lost him. They had my name. They had my photo. They had my data, my location history, my credit card use, my IP addresses. If they really wanted to track me, they didn't need a man on foot to do it. Still, that little gap I just created? It was enough. Enough to put distance between us, enough to buy me a few precious minutes. And in those minutes, I could make a move. I pulled out my phone and opened a different encrypted chat app, one that didn't route through any server in the US. I typed a single message to a contact I hadn't used in years. Me, need to meet. Urgent. Same city. The reply came in under 30 seconds. Them, 1 hour. Westbridge Park. Bring proof. Proof. I patted my leg, feeling the SSD drive pressed against my skin through my sock. For the first time all day, a flicker of hope lit in my chest. If I could get this data into the right hands, I might not just save myself, I might bring the whole rotten thing crashing down. Westbridge Park was only a couple of miles away, but getting there without leaving a trail was going to be tricky. Every rideshare app one could use was tied to my name. My bank card? Same problem. Even public transit was risky. Most buses had security cameras, and the facial recognition system in this city had been quietly upgraded last year. By who? Cinderbite. I decided to walk. Not directly, but in a zigzag pattern, doubling back through side streets and weaving through crowded areas. It wasn't perfect, but it might at least make my movements harder to piece together in real time. The city was bright and restless that afternoon. A street vendor was shouting about 2-for-1 hot dogs, the smell of onions hanging in the air. Somewhere down the block, a busker was playing an electric violin that somehow sounded both haunting and manic. I was halfway through a crosswalk when my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I froze for just a second, earning a honk from a delivery van. I stepped onto the curb and scanned the crowd. Nothing obvious. No hoodie guy. No one staring at me, at least not in a way that stood out. Another buzz. Same number. Meet us. We can make this disappear. I clenched my jaw. Disappear? Did they mean the problem, or me? I didn't reply. Instead, I powered the phone down completely and dropped it into a storm drain at the edge of the sidewalk. If they were using it to track me, that would buy a little more time. Or so I thought. 5 minutes later, as I passed a narrow alley behind a laundromat, a black SUV rolled up beside me. The back window slid down just enough for me to see the man inside. Not hoodie guy. This one was clean-cut, mid-40s, wearing a suit that screamed corporate expense account. "Ethan," he said, his voice calm but edged with authority. "Get in. We can talk." I kept walking. The SUV rolled forward to match my pace. "You don't have to do this the hard way. You're in over your head. We can protect you." I almost laughed. "Protect me? You're the ones who fired me." "That's not what this is about anymore," he said, his tone dropping. "There are people involved now who don't care about the company. People you can't run from." The SUV stopped again, this time blocking my path at the corner. The passenger door clicked open. "Last chance," the man said. And that's when I saw it, in the reflection of a shop window across the street. A figure leaning against a lamppost, watching us. My contact from the park. They'd come early. The figure at the lamppost had their hands in the pockets of a weathered leather jacket, head tilted slightly, like they'd been waiting for me longer than they should have. Even from across the street, I could feel their eyes lock onto mine. They gave the faintest nod. The SUV's passenger door was still open, a silent invitation, or a trap. "Ethan," the man inside said again, his tone patient but hardening. "We can solve this right now. You get in, we talk, you walk away from all of it. But if you keep going," he let the sentence hang. I shifted my weight, pretending to hesitate while I mapped the street in my head. The contact was about 30 feet diagonally across from me, beyond 2 lanes of traffic. The light was green for the cars, which meant if I ran now, I'd be dodging moving vehicles. The man must have seen me glance, because he leaned forward slightly. "Who are you meeting?" I didn't answer. Behind me, I heard the dull thud of another SUV door opening. My pulse spiked, there were at least 2 more people inside. The contact moved. Not toward me, but away from the lamppost, heading into the flow of pedestrians. It was subtle, but deliberate. They were telling me, lose the tail first. The man in the SUV must have read it too, because his voice sharpened. "Don't walk away from me." I stepped back, putting my hands up like I was surrendering. That made him lean just a fraction closer to the open door, exactly what I needed. I dropped low, spun on my heel, and bolted between the front bumper of the SUV and a delivery truck that had just pulled up behind it. Horns blared as I darted into the crosswalk, weaving between cars. Someone shouted my name. Heavy footsteps hit the pavement. I made it across the street, but the contact was gone. Completely vanished into the crowd. I scanned frantically, no leather jacket, no familiar tilt of the head, nothing. That was when I realized the real problem. I hadn't lost the SUV. It had pulled around the block, cutting me off from the opposite side. And this time, the driver's door opened too. They weren't asking any more. Up until that moment, I'd been thinking like prey. Keep moving. Stay out of sight. Buy time. But standing there with the SUV blocking the street ahead and its driver stepping out like he owned the asphalt, I realized something. If I kept running, eventually I'd run out of road. The man was broad-shouldered, mid-30s, wearing a polo shirt that looked plain until you noticed the discreet earpiece coiled into his right ear. His eyes swept the street with the calm confidence of someone who's done this before. Not chasing criminals, but acquiring assets. I wasn't going to be an asset. I tightened the strap of my backpack and started walking, not away, but toward the nearest open doorway. It happened to be a dusty corner hardware store with a faded bell over the entrance. The driver clocked my movement instantly. "Ethan," he barked. I didn't answer. I stepped inside, letting the bell jingle behind me, and kept moving down the narrow aisles. The smell of oil and metal hit me like a wall. An older man behind the counter glanced up from a newspaper but didn't say a word. My heart was still racing, but my thoughts were sharper now. I wasn't just thinking about escape, I was thinking about leverage. I had the SSD drive. I had enough data to bury Cinderbite and whoever was protecting them. The trick was finding a way to use it before they got to me. In the middle of the store, I stopped at a rack of prepaid flip phones. No GPS. No smart features. Just bare-bones functionality. I grabbed 1 and 2 top-up cards, then made my way to the counter. The old man squinted at me. "Cash only for those." "Perfect," I said, handing over the crumpled bills I kept for emergencies. As he rang me up, I caught a glimpse through the dusty front window. The SUV driver had taken up position just outside, pretending to browse the fruit stand next door. His eyes never left the doorway. That was fine. Let him watch the front. Because this hardware store, like most in the city, had a back door. I took my change, muttered a thanks, and headed toward the rear of the shop. The air got cooler, and the hum of the street faded. When I pushed through the back door, I emerged into a service alley that ran parallel to the block. No cameras that I could see. No footsteps behind me. I was grinning before I even realized it. For the first time all day, I wasn't reacting to them, they were reacting to me. And if I played it right, I could make sure the next move was mine. The service alley was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. My shoes crunched over loose gravel as I ducked behind a stack of discarded pallets. I tore open the plastic on the prepaid phone, slid in the battery, and waited for the faint buzz of power. No setup screens, no GPS prompts, just a blinking signal icon in the top corner. Good. I loaded the top-up code, dialed a number from memory, and held the phone to my ear. It rang twice before a voice picked up, low, clipped, and familiar. "Say your name," the voice said. "Ethan Cole," I replied. A pause. "This line isn't safe." "I know. But I've got something you'll want, and I don't have much time." Another pause, longer this time. "Then, what did you take?" "Data. From Cinderbite. Government contracts, surveillance logs, and something else. Something with my name in it." I heard a faint exhale on the other end. "You shouldn't have called me." "Too late," I said. "They're on me already. I need extraction or a dead drop." "Ethan," the voice said, quieter now, "you don't understand. It's not just Cinderbite after you. That file with your name in it? It wasn't an accident." My grip on the phone tightened. "What do you mean?" "They didn't just pull your data. They built a profile on you. You've been a test case in their predictive targeting model for over a year." I swallowed hard. A test case for what? To see if they could make someone act in ways they could predict, and then control the outcome. Every choice you've made for months. They've been nudging it. Small things at first. Job assignments. Meeting invites. Even the people you run into on the street. That's not, I stopped, because my mind was already replaying the last year. The odd project reassignment. The chance meeting with an old classmate who happened to work in cybersecurity. The email from HR about attending a random leadership seminar. "You were the experiment," the voice continued. And now you've stepped out of their parameters. That's why they're coming down on you this hard. My thoughts scrambled to keep up. So, what happens if they catch me? They'll wipe you, the voice said flatly. Not memory, though they could ruin your credibility so completely it might as well be. They'll erase you from the network. No ID, no bank accounts, no digital trace. You'll still exist, but as far as the world's concerned, you'll be a ghost. My pulse was a steady thud in my ears. I glanced back toward the street. No SUV in sight, but I knew better than to believe I was clear. Meet me, I said. Now. The voice hesitated. 30 minutes. Old Harrow Station. Platform 3. Don't bring your phone. The line went dead. I stared at the cheap plastic in my hand for a long second, then dropped it into a trash bin. The SSD drive felt heavier against my ankle now. Not just evidence, my only lifeline. And I finally understood something that made my stomach turn. This wasn't about exposing Cinderbite anymore. It was about making sure they never finished what they'd started with me. Old Harrow Station hadn't seen a commuter train in over a decade. Now it was just a skeleton, rusted metal supports, cracked concrete platforms, and faded signs that looked like they'd been bleached by 100 summers. Getting there without drawing attention was the hard part. I stuck to side streets, keeping my head down, never taking the same road twice in a row. I avoided storefront windows, knowing even a reflection could be picked up by the wrong software. The sun was lower now, turning the air golden in a way that would have been beautiful if it didn't make me feel so exposed. Every shadow seemed longer, every open space more dangerous. Halfway there, I cut through a narrow alley lined with dumpsters. The smell hit me first, rot and old fryer grease. I was halfway down when a sound made me stop cold. Footsteps. Not behind me. Ahead. I took a step back, my sneakers scraping against the concrete. The footsteps stopped too. Then, a soft metallic click. Gun? Camera shutter? I couldn't tell. I backed away slowly, eyes on the dark shape at the far end of the alley. The shape moved, just a fraction, then melted into the shadow of a doorway. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and bolted out the other side of the alley, weaving between parked cars until I reached the main road again. Every part of me wanted to believe it was just some random person. But in my gut, I knew better. They were hurting me. When I finally saw the jagged roofline of Old Harrow Station in the distance, I slowed down, forcing my breathing into something that wouldn't draw attention. The place looked even deader than I'd imagined. Graffiti tagged every wall. The ticket windows were boarded up. The platform itself was littered with broken glass and wind-blown trash. But there were people here. 2 teenagers sitting on the edge of the platform, passing a bottle between them. A man in a faded army jacket staring at nothing in particular. And, further down, near the far end, a figure in a weathered leather jacket. They were leaning casually against one of the rusted support beams, head tilted, like they'd been there for hours. It was my contact. I felt the tension in my chest loosen just a bit. 30 minutes. I'd made it in 25. I walked the length of the platform, keeping my pace casual. My contact didn't move until I was within a few feet. "You brought it?" they asked, their voice low. I gave the smallest nod. That's when they looked past me, and their expression changed in a way that made my blood run cold. They whispered one word, "Run." I didn't ask questions. When someone like my contact says run, you run. I pivoted instantly, scanning for the threat before I even moved. That's when I saw them, 2 men in dark windbreakers coming down the platform from the opposite end. Their movements were too coordinated to be random, their eyes locked straight on me. The army jacket man on the bench stood up. He wasn't just some drifter. A third operative. 3 directions cut off in seconds. Leather jacket, my contact. Was already moving, slipping past me and heading toward the crumbling stairwell at the far corner of the station. I followed, boots slamming against the platform boards. Shouts erupted behind us. The kind of short, clipped commands you hear in tactical drills. We hit the stairs at full speed, taking them 2 at a time. Rust groaned under our weight. A glass bottle rolled under my foot and nearly sent me flying, but I caught the rail at the last second. At the bottom was an old service tunnel. The kind maintenance crews used back when trains still came through here. It was dark, smelling of wet stone and rust, the light from the platform shrinking fast behind us. My contact pulled a small flashlight from their jacket and flicked it on, the beam cutting through the gloom. "Keep up," they hissed. We ran, our footsteps echoing off the tunnel walls. Somewhere behind us, heavier boots pounded in pursuit. "This tunnel comes out on Mill Street," my contact said between breaths. Once we're out, they didn't get to finish. A figure stepped out from a side alcove ahead, blocking the beam of light. Before I could react, there was a flash of metal, a gun, low and steady. "Drop it," the figure barked. Leather jacket froze. The flashlight beam trembled slightly, but their voice stayed calm. "You don't want to do this." The figure's gaze flicked to me. "You're Ethan Cole." Hearing my name in that damp, airless tunnel made my skin crawl. Behind us, the shouts were getting closer. The trap was closing. In that moment, my mind split in 2, one part calculating angles, distances, odds, the other screaming that if I didn't move now, I wasn't leaving this tunnel at all. I took a step to the left, putting my hand casually toward my ankle as if adjusting my jeans. My fingers brushed the SSD drive, still hidden in my sock. And then I made my choice. I kicked the flashlight out of Leather Jacket's hand. The tunnel plunged into darkness. Gunshots cracked, deafening in the enclosed space. The flash lit the walls for a split second, just long enough to see my contact dive for cover and the gunman stagger from the sudden noise. I ran. No plan, no thought, just pure animal instinct, pounding down the tunnel into blackness with only the memory of the layout to guide me. Somewhere behind me, someone shouted my name again, and this time, it wasn't a threat. It was a warning. The tunnel curved sharply to the right, and for a moment, I was blind to everything but the pounding of my own footsteps. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but somewhere in that adrenaline-soaked haze, a different feeling started to push through. I wasn't running just to get away anymore. I was running to set something in motion. The gunman had been startled, but not taken out. The operatives behind me were still coming, though more cautiously now. In the dark, I had the advantage. I knew I was smaller, faster, and, most importantly, desperate enough to take risks they wouldn't. I slowed my pace just enough to hear the echo of their boots. 3 sets. Spread apart. Perfect. Ahead, I saw the faintest glow, not daylight, but the weak, artificial orange of a maintenance light left to die on its own battery. Underneath it was a side alcove. I ducked into it, pressing my back against the wall. My pulse thudded in my ears. The first set of boots came close, fast, confident. I waited until they were almost beside me, then shot out my leg. My foot caught his shin, hard, and he went down with a grunt that bounced off the tunnel walls. Before he could yell, I slammed my shoulder into his ribs and grabbed the front of his jacket. My fingers found the cold edge of something metallic in his pocket, a keycard, and I yanked it free before shoving him back into the main tunnel. The second operative was right behind him, and I didn't wait for recognition. I hurled the stolen keycard into the darkness ahead, the small plastic clattering loudly against the wall. It was enough to make them hesitate, just for a second, the kind of second you can build a plan on. I sprinted again, but this time I wasn't just fleeing, I was steering them. Each curve, each alcove, each shadow was now part of my map. And then I remembered something the voice on the phone had said about Old Harrow Station. The network here was old. Unpatched. Still connected in places no one thought to shut down. If I could find a maintenance console, that could be my opening. I spotted the door about 50 yards ahead, dented, paint peeling, a small red light still glowing above the handle. When I reached it, the keycard slid through the reader like it belonged there. The lock clicked open. Inside, the air was warmer, filled with the faint hum of ancient electronics. A row of dusty control panels lined the wall, each covered in unlabeled switches and buttons. It was a mess, but it was my mess now. The room smelled faintly of dust and burnt wiring, like it hadn't seen a human in years. A single fluorescent tube buzzed overhead, casting everything in a pale, uneven light. I shut the door behind me and locked it. The echo of boots in the tunnel was still there, faint but closing. I didn't have long. The control panels in front of me were a museum of forgotten tech, bulky CRT monitors, green-on-black terminal screens, unlabeled toggle switches. Whoever last worked here must have abandoned it mid-shift. A coffee mug sat fossilized on the counter, its contents long since evaporated into a ring of brown residue. I wiped the dust from one of the monitors and found a login prompt blinking patiently. No fancy retina scan, no biometric locks, just old-school username and password. I didn't need theirs. I had mine. One of the perks of being a back-end dev at Cinderbyte was that you learned the skeleton keys of outdated systems. Our code didn't just integrate with modern networks, it was designed to burrow into legacy infrastructure like this. The company had entire modules for exploiting unpatched systems and piggybacking on their access points. Which meant if I could wake this console up, I could open a tunnel straight into Cinderbyte's internal network. And maybe, just maybe, flip the surveillance feed back on them. My fingers moved fast over the clunky keyboard, muscle memory guiding me through the old Unix commands. A directory tree popped up. I recognized some of the system architecture, primitive, but still wired into the city's underground data lines. I tunneled in. First to a municipal transit node. Then to a redundant server cluster labeled simply, city_backup_02. And from there, into Cinderbyte's own admin portal. The familiar login screen made my pulse spike. I typed in my old credentials, expecting a rejection. Instead, access granted. They hadn't scrubbed me completely. That was their first mistake. The system's dashboard opened, a map of active tracking operations lighting up in real time. Red dots marked moving targets. My stomach dropped when I saw 3 clustered just outside the station, the operatives closing in. But there was something else, a command interface. I could send false location pings. I could black out their tracking entirely. And if I was bold enough, I could dump every single active surveillance feed they had straight into a public node. It would be chaos. For them. For me. For everyone involved. I sat there, the SSD still pressing against my ankle, knowing I had 2 plays: use this system to vanish entirely, or blow the whole thing wide open. Outside the door, the boots were getting louder. I started typing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Vanish, or burn them. I thought about Kara. About the warning texts. About the quiet humiliation of being walked out of Cinderbyte like a criminal when the truth was, I was the only one in that building trying to stop the real crime. If I disappeared now, they'd just bury the program deeper, rebuild it stronger, and start over with someone else. If I exposed them, maybe I wouldn't make it out. But the game would be over. I started typing commands. Not to hide, but to broadcast. The console screen flickered as I began redirecting Cinderbyte's live surveillance data into an unsecured public node buried deep in a dark web forum. Thousands of video feeds, text logs, and geolocation pings began to mirror in real time. It was like opening a fire hydrant into the street, you couldn't stop it once it started. The system status bar jumped from 10% to 30% in seconds. The pounding on the door started then. 3 sharp bangs, then a voice. "Ethan. Open it." I ignored it, feeding in the encryption keys from the SSD drive. The bar hit 60%. The pounding turned to slamming. The old hinges groaned. "Last chance," the voice barked. 80%. I felt the heat of adrenaline in my chest, every heartbeat syncing with the progress bar. 90%. The final sequence required a manual confirmation, a single keystroke to send the whole archive live to the node. I reached for the enter key, the door burst open. The first operative through was the driver from the SUV. His eyes went straight to the screen, widening as he realized what was happening. "Stop him." The second guy lunged. I twisted in my chair, catching him in the side with my elbow, just enough to break his momentum. My hand slammed down on the enter key. The screen flashed, dump complete. And then the lights in the room cut out. Every monitor went dark at once. Somewhere in the blackness, someone cursed, not me. Because even with the power gone, I knew what I'd done. The data was out. Cinderbyte's secrets were no longer theirs to hide. The blackness was instant and absolute, swallowing everything. It wasn't just the lights in the maintenance room, the entire station had gone dark. Somewhere to my right, I heard the scrape of a boot and the harsh sound of breathing. Too close. Then a voice, low but urgent, "Flashlights. Now." A beam of white light cut across the room, slicing through the dust-filled air. It caught me for half a second, just long enough for the SUV driver to start toward me. I didn't wait for him to close the gap. My hand shot out, grabbing the cold metal edge of the console table. I yanked hard, tipping the entire thing over in front of me. The old monitor crashed to the floor, shattering into a spray of glass and sparks. The flashlight beam jerked away. A curse followed. I bolted for the door. Behind me, someone shouted, "He's on the move." Boots pounded after me, the sound bouncing wildly off the tunnel walls as I burst back into the main corridor of Old Harrow Station. The air was thicker out here, the smell of mildew stronger. I could barely see more than vague shapes, rusted pillars, sagging beams, the faint outline of the platform stairs ahead. I took them 2 at a time, hands on the railing to steady myself. My shoulder clipped something, a sign, maybe. And pain shot down my arm, but I didn't stop. At the top, the faintest glow of daylight spilled through the broken station entrance. I aimed for it like it was oxygen. The first bullet cracked past my ear, embedding into the wall just ahead. The second pinged off the railing beside my hand. They weren't trying to scare me. They were trying to end this. I dove sideways into a shadowed alcove just as more footsteps thundered past above me, different set, heavier, more rushed. And then I realized I wasn't alone in the alcove. Leather Jacket was there, pressed against the wall, eyes wide but steady. "You got it out?" "Yeah," I whispered, my chest still heaving. They gave a short nod. "Good. Now we just have to make sure you survive the next 5 minutes." Outside, the station echoed with the sound of boots and shouted orders. 5 minutes suddenly felt like an eternity. Leather Jacket didn't wait for me to catch my breath. They grabbed my arm and pulled me deeper into the alcove, where a narrow stairwell climbed into the shadowed upper floor of the station. The steps were half-rotted, the banister splintered, but it was the only place that led up instead of out, and up meant high ground. We took the stairs fast but quiet, every creak threatening to give us away. Below us, the operatives' voices bounced off the stone walls, split and sweep. "He's still inside, don't let him hit the street." At the top, the stairwell opened into a wide mezzanine that must have once overlooked the main concourse. Now it was a skeleton of what it had been, broken windows letting in strips of late afternoon light, the floor littered with pigeon feathers and shattered tiles. From here, you could see almost the whole station below. 2 operatives were moving along the far platform, rifles low but ready. Another was climbing the same stairs we'd just taken, slow, cautious, scanning every step. Leather Jacket crouched behind a half-collapsed wall and motioned for me to do the same. "You armed?" they whispered. I shook my head. They pulled a compact black pistol from inside their jacket and placed it in my hand. "Safety's off. Don't shoot unless you have to." The weight of it was heavier than I expected. I wasn't used to this kind of weapon. My only training came from late-night YouTube videos and one half-forgotten range trip years ago. "Plan?" I asked. 2 minutes from now, they'll try to force us toward the west exit. They'll have a van waiting there. We don't go near it. We stay high, keep them guessing, and if we have to drop down, we drop where we choose, not where they heard us. I nodded, my pulse loud in my ears. The operative on the stairs reached the landing below us. He was maybe 20 feet away, head tilted as he scanned the mezzanine. Leather Jacket raised a finger. "Wait." The man took another step. His boot hit a loose tile, and the sharp crack of it snapping under his weight gave away his position. Leather Jacket moved like lightning. They stepped out from behind cover, fired twice, and the man dropped hard onto the landing, his weapon skittering across the floor. Shouts erupted below. The other 2 operatives broke into a run, their boots slamming against the old wood as they took the main stairs 2 at a time. I raised the pistol, my grip shaky but determined. The next 30 seconds were going to decide everything. The first operative hit the mezzanine level like a wrecking ball, weapon raised. I didn't think, I squeezed the trigger. The gun's kick jolted through my arms, louder than I'd expected in the enclosed space. My shot went wide, but it did exactly what I needed, it made him duck. Leather Jacket used that second to fire a controlled pair of shots. One hit the metal railing, sparking, the other caught him in the leg. He went down with a grunt, his rifle clattering away. The second operative was right behind him, faster and more focused. He didn't hesitate, just raised his weapon and fired. The shot punched a hole in the wall inches from my head, spraying dust and splinters across my face. I dropped flat, sliding behind a fallen beam. My heart was pounding, but my grip on the pistol tightened. Leather Jacket moved left, drawing the second operative's fire. The distraction was all I needed. I leaned out just enough to take a shot, not aiming for a kill, just center mass to stop him moving. The round hit his shoulder. He stumbled, his rifle swinging low, and Leather Jacket closed the gap, kicking it out of his hands. For a moment, the mezzanine was still except for the sound of boots below retreating. I risked a glance over the railing and saw why. Down on the main floor, more men in dark gear had entered, but they weren't with Cinderbite. These guys had government written all over them, badges on their vests, radios on their shoulders, sweeping the station with practiced efficiency. And at the center of them, 2 agents in suits. One of them was holding a tablet, scanning through something, maybe the same live data dump I'd unleashed minutes ago. His expression was grim. The other spoke into a radio. "We've got enough. Secure the scene." That's when I realized, they weren't here for me. Not exactly. They were here for them. Leather Jacket gave me a look, a tiny nod. We backed away from the railing and moved toward the far end of the mezzanine. There was a maintenance ladder there, half hidden behind a collapsed section of ceiling. We climbed down into the shadowed corner of the station, unseen by the suits and their team. By the time they reached the mezzanine, we were already slipping out through a side door, the cool air of the alley hitting my face like a promise. Sirens were approaching from somewhere nearby. The city's machinery was turning, and for once, it wasn't aimed at me. I still had the SSD drive. The data was out. And Cinderbite? They were done. We didn't stop moving until the station was 3 blocks behind us and the noise of sirens had faded into the background hum of the city. Leather Jacket led us through a narrow backstreet lined with fire escapes, their eyes constantly scanning for anyone following. I could tell they were running on instinct, the same way I was. Every movement deliberate, every choice a calculation. Finally, we ducked into the shadow of a loading dock. It smelled faintly of diesel and wet cardboard, but it was quiet. For the first time in hours, I let my back rest against the wall. My legs trembled, not from fear anymore, but from the sheer exhaustion of running on adrenaline. "You did it," Leather Jacket said simply. I gave a half-laugh that came out more like a cough. Did I? I don't even know what I just unleashed. All I know is it's not in their hands anymore. They studied me for a second, then nodded. That's enough. For now. I pulled the SSD from my sock and turned it over in my hand. This little sliver of metal and silicon had been my curse and my lifeline, my reason for being hunted and the only thing keeping me from disappearing. When I thought back on the last 48 hours, it didn't feel real. Getting fired. The cafe. The man in the hoodie. The SUVs. The tunnel. The gunfire. The operatives scattering as government agents poured in. It was like watching a highlight reel of someone else's nightmare. And yet, I felt something I hadn't since before they took my badge and locked me out of my own code. Control. Maybe I'd never work in tech again. Maybe I'd never walk into an office without wondering who was watching me. But I'd made a choice, one they hadn't scripted, one they couldn't predict. That thought alone was worth the bruises, the close calls, the endless sprint through shadows. I slipped the SSD into my jacket pocket. So what now? I asked. Leather Jacket's mouth twitched, maybe the shadow of a smile. Now? We disappear. At least until the dust settles. You've got people in power scrambling, Ethan. Let them scramble. The sun was dipping lower, painting the edges of the city in fire. Somewhere behind those glowing windows, the news cycle was already chewing on what I'd set free. And somewhere in a half-empty office, Cinderbite's executives were realizing that the game they thought they'd rigged was over. We stayed in that loading dock until the shadows stretched long and the city lights flickered on one by one. The hum of rush-hour traffic faded to the softer rhythm of evening, and for the first time, I let myself believe we'd made it out. I still didn't know where Leather Jacket came from, who they worked for, or why they'd risked their neck for me, but I knew I wouldn't be alive without them. "Guess I owe you," I said. They shook their head. "You don't owe me. You just have to live long enough to see what you did today actually matter." That stuck with me. Because as much as I wanted to believe that the data dump would lead to headlines, hearings, maybe even prison sentences for the people who'd built Cinderbite's surveillance machine, I also knew the system they were part of didn't give up easily. Somewhere, someone would be working to bury this again. But for now, it was out of their hands. By the time I reached my apartment that night, after 3 different bus transfers, 2 changes of clothes from my go-bag, and a long walk through streets I'd never taken before, the SSD drive felt almost light in my pocket. I placed it in the same floorboard compartment where I'd hidden it before, the wood sliding back into place with a satisfying click. I sent Kara a short message from the prepaid phone I'd bought earlier, "Me, safe. We'll explain later. Love you." Her reply came almost instantly, "Kara, whatever happened, I'm proud of you. That's when it hit me, the strange, quiet truth of it all. I hadn't just been running from Cinderbite. I'd been running toward the moment I'd stop letting someone else write my story. The government could take over their offices. The public could debate what it all meant. The industry could try to pretend nothing had changed. But I knew. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared of what came next. If this story touched you, please subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how you feel about it.